we need to know what we're crying for. What am I actually seeking? There's a beauty in just liberating our cry, but when it comes to relational intimacy, it's like, there's a bigger question to ask, I guess, in the self of just like, what am I needing right now? What do I need in this cry? What do I need in this offering? Am I needing his, am I just feeling desperate for his attention and just to feel loved? Or do I really want to feel met? Do I really want him to come into my heart?
Welcome to the Embodied Relationship Experience podcast. My name is John Wineland. I'm your host, and I'm here today with Nina Lombardo, the creator of Way of Devotion, and a woman I've known for, 10 years now? It's 8, 9, 10 years?
Less than that.
Yeah, time has flown. Mm-hmm. And we sort of grew up in this space surrounding David Deda's work and David Deda's teachings, and spent a lot of time, sort of learning and growing and then becoming teachers in our own right. And she, called me, if you're connected with me a few weeks ago, and said, I'm coming to Austin. And I was like, yeah, let's do this, because I think there's so much to get into in the space. And I know there's a lot of questions that have come from you guys about wanting to dive deeper into the, space of polarity, what that means, what that even fucking means. And Nina is the perfect person to do that with. So thank you for being here, Nina. I really, really love and appreciate your work and how you've developed and what you offer. You're one of the few women that I send women to.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah, because I really appreciate the way that you are living in the work, in your relationship, in your life, in your daily life. It's just like there's a lot of people who will teach feminine embodiment and teach sexual polarity, but you're not quite sure if they're actually living it in their lives. And that's one of the things that I've always really appreciated about you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. So we have a list of questions. You suggested, and I thought it was a great suggestion, to get a list of questions from men specifically to ask, someone who works with women very closely and is a woman herself. Right? So we have some questions from men, and then I also have some questions that I was thinking about, and I think we'll just kind of bounce these questions off, and then if we need to take a left turn or a right turn, we'll follow the flow.
Perfect.
Cool. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think maybe just starting with a couple clarifications of definition, right? Like a lot of these terms get thrown around in our space, sexual polarity, devotion, embodiment, right? And I keep forgetting that a lot of normal people, not weirdos like us, don't know exactly what those things mean. So it's always nice, I think, to stop and go, all right, what do these things mean? And not that you and I have the dictionary definition or the only definition, but I think it would be a nice way to start. So I would ask you, what do you consider devotion to be?
In short, I believe devotion is orienting to something greater than yourself and pouring your love, your energy, your attention towards that thing. And so it doesn't necessarily have to be something spiritual. Obviously, when we think of the word devotion, a lot of people think of God, devotion to God. But motherhood is another big one.
Yeah.
Devoted to parenting, devoted to your children, devoted to your work, devoted to your art, devoted to your project, whatever it is that you are orienting your life around, orienting your attention, your energy, and your love around.
Yeah. So I think if we were going to, take that and run with it a little bit, we could say that what you're spending your time and attention focusing on is what you're devoting yourself to.
Yeah, what you're pouring your energy.
Yeah, right. Okay, great. So, and what I find is that so many of us, right, will go through the days and our devotion has moved from something divine or greater than ourselves to something, within ourselves, a set of thoughts or some habit or pattern. And so I think a really cool way to work with devotion is to look at where are you putting your time and attention, and is it what you want to be devoted to?
Right.
And since you've created this space, the Way of Devotion, you teach workshops, you make content, how do you try to help people reorient themselves from that which they've habitually devoted themselves to, whether it's money or, physical fitness or, I don't know, doom scrolling, whatever we spend our time doing, to something that's more fulfilling, something that's more expansive.
Well, I work with a lot of women, and a lot of women, without realizing it, are probably more devoted to getting love than to being love.
Oh, what a great point. Yeah.
And experiencing love and living as love. So that's one of the biggest shifts that I take women into is, where is your attention? Are you focusing on what you can get from your partner, how pretty you look, or what you need from him? Or are you focusing on your own bodily experience and the fullness within you and offering that freely through your body and heart?
Yeah. That's a great distinction. Yeah, and a question I think that people can, men too, can just ask themselves throughout the day as they're sort of, try to orient and navigate the world or their relationships, is like, am I trying to get something? Am I trying to give something? Or am I being the embodied expression of, right? Which I think brings us to this topic of the 3 stages, of David Data's 3 stages, which is, this foundational piece that, your work and my work, kind of revolves around. And it's another piece that I think has been, I don't know, misinterpreted, or, as David's work has been disseminated over the years, there's been misinterpretations. There's been, these kind of cherry picking of certain concepts without real context. And so starting with the, what are the 3 stages? I like to think about them in terms of there's 3 stages of relating, but there's also 3 stages of expression, right? But I'm curious how you would define David's 3 stages.
Sure. It's a huge topic.
It's a huge topic, yeah.
There's a lot of different angles to explore it from. And I like to focus first on the personal angle rather than the relational angle of growing through the 3 stages on our own as a solo practitioner.
Right.
And one thing about them is that they are not necessarily linear. That's really important to remember, because people are like, I want to get to the 3rd stage and stay there as if it's this permanent thing.
Good luck.
So they're simultaneously evolutionary. We can evolve and grow through the stages over time, and we naturally do if we're focused on growing. But they also happen moment to moment. And the 3 stages exist within us simultaneously. And in any moment, we can orient our attention to the 1st stage, which is the domain of the personal survival. What do I need? I need food. I need sleep. I need comfort. I need safety. So when our attention is focused on those things, we're in a 1st stage state of awareness. And granted, a lot of the time throughout the day, we need to be in the 1st stage when we're hungry. So we need to build upon them, right? So it's hard to move to the 2nd stage, for example, if our 1st stage needs aren't met. Right? The 1st stage, like I mentioned, is this stage of the personal, our survival needs, our basic needs. The 2nd stage moves into a little bit more development of the soul, of the spirit, of the psyche, and becoming more whole unto ourself.
Right.
So we start to look at our triggers, our patterns, our wounds that all kind of fester in that 1st stage place. And we start to decondition ourselves from some of those patterns, because the 1st stage is the stage of our patterns and conditioning and all of that. So we grow into the 2nd stage when we start wanting to work on that. Like, I don't want to be run by the patterns of my parents or the cultural patterns. I really want to find out who I am and grow into my own sovereignty as a human being and liberate myself from some of these confines of the 1st stage. So you start growing into the 2nd stage when you start doing that work. And then the leap from the 2nd to the 3rd stage is where I work with a lot of people. And so I'll work with women who are in the 2nd stage where, like, I feel whole unto myself. I'm good. I don't really need anyone or anything. I could be alone for long periods of time, but I want something more. I want to be filled by life. I want to feel eros. I want to feel fucked. I want to feel permeated. How do I get to that next level of communion? And that's where we start doing the 3rd stage work, which is really about embodying love and offering love and that domain of other woo-woo words that
right.
also probably need some definition.
Yeah,
but,
for sure.
For
sure. And what I've found personally, and this is my personal experience and what I've seen teaching people this, is that I see a lot of people who think that they've done their second stage work, like, oh, I've done that. I've gone to therapy for years and I'm happy being alone. But what I found is that we really don't know if we've done that until we're in the relational field.
Right.
Because, because that's where the triggers that lead to the patterns of relating that were imprinted upon us by our loving parents.
Totally.
Thank you, Mom. Thank you, Dad. That's where we can really, get to see. So I just want to maybe fluff this out a little bit about how you see people moving from, second stage experience or second stage, let's call it spiritual development, emotional development, into third stage. How do they get there? I suppose is the question that I would.
How do they get there?
Yeah.
That is the money question.
Right. How do you get from like I'm in my pattern, I see I'm in my pattern, I'm actually working on my pattern, but my pattern is still kind of in charge most days, or maybe it's 60% of the time. It loosens slowly. David used to talk about this all the time. It takes years for the therapeutic wounds to unwind. And yet, if we try to practice in the third stage, the yogic stage, the art stage, right, the divine stage, we still have to come and deal with these things.
Absolutely.
And so, maybe you could talk a little bit about how that movement in and out of second to third stage and back down to first and then into third works in your experience.
Yeah, I'll try. And I think talking about the third stage is best approached through a more poetic lens, because it's kind of hard to get to directly. And that kind of gives you some information about what we're talking about here. But I like to use the example of making art. I play music, so music is usually my portal to describing how to achieve or get to that place. So when you're learning a new instrument, one that you've never played before, say you're learning how to play piano, you're going to sit at the piano and you're not going to know what to do, because you have all these old patterns where your fingers don't even know how to move that certain way, right? So there's a period, let's call it the second stage work, where you're just going to the piano and practicing your scales every day so that your fingers can play fluidly, so you're breaking the patterns of your habits that have been developed, and you're just learning how to play in this structure freely. And once you get that down, then you can start bringing some more poetry into it, some more feeling into it. You can play that chord progression not so monotonously like you're practicing scales, but you can bring your emotion through it. You could bring your love through it, and you can start to flow and improvise and jam with it. And most musicians know that at some point when you're jamming, you just reach this state of you totally get out of your mind. You're not thinking about what you're doing because the structure is so there. You kind of have the foundations down where you don't have to think about the process so much anymore. And you could just make art. You could just give your love through your fingers. And granted, you don't have to be a master to give love through your fingers or whatever instrument you're using, your body, your voice.
Thank God.
Yeah, you don't have to be a master, but the field and the domain we work in is how can we become more masterful, right? How can we bring more love and more poetry through this? Of course, anyone could play 2 notes on the piano and play it with all the feeling in the world, whether they have training or not, and they could give all their love through it. And I encourage everyone to do that. And I encourage us to keep practicing, to keep that foundation strong so our vessel becomes more liberated to give wider and fuller expressions of love through the body.
Yeah. And I'm curious how you would relate that to the practical day-to-day living of relationship.
Yeah.
Living with somebody, and what would be the scales that somebody would be practicing in the second stage that would then allow their devotion and their art to come through their bodies
That's a good
more.
Question.
Yeah.
Being really clear with your needs, both in yourself and in the relationship. So communication is a big part of the second stage, identifying what do I need in this relationship? What am I wanting? What's not working? And learning how to identify that in your own body and communicate that with your partner is one of those foundations that will allow the flow of love to become a lot easier. Because the third stage in intimate relationships, so I've been talking a lot about the personal process, but an intimate relationship is really just two people doing that together, improvising, jamming, loving together. And it really is a state of no thought. It's just a state of love, loving completely. So anything that's preventing us from totally opening as love in the moment, we have to go back and
to
work
the scales,
on and
right?
address.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And that's an ongoing process.
Yeah. I like to think about this as sort of foundational pieces, right? Like, so if we're thinking that the third stage is sort of a sacred temple, and the second stage is the foundation on which, in the first stage too, or those are the foundations upon which the temple can be built. And so if there isn't, for example, if you're not able to take care of your own needs or identify your own needs or communicate your own needs or be able to hear their needs without collapsing, right? Which is another, practice in and of itself. Then the foundation is weak and cracked, and the work in the temple is built on, sand, right? Or cracked pillars, or whatever, metaphor you want to use. But if we're moving into this space of trying to artfully take care of our own needs, right? Which I think is what you're talking about the first stage is, right? Artfully identify and be clear on what our own needs are, and then learn to communicate them to our partner. Then we are sort of in the scales version. We're in that sort of learning version of the instrument of love that we're trying to play together, right? I think this is important because so many people miss this. They just want to jump into the juicy, masculine, feminine practices, get fucked to God and open to God. And who doesn't? Who doesn't? But what I see in people and what I've experienced in my own relating, I went through this period recently where I had to realize, like, wow, there's so much in my personal development that I never attended to, And even though I was really good at the, art I could make art. Right. I just couldn't, I couldn't live in the mundane with that art, right? Because of childhood wounds and patterns that I'd never fully transmuted. And so, and then lo and behold, I start to see it everywhere in my community. I'm imagining you see it in your community too. And I appreciate us staying here a little bit because these are the questions I get all the time about, like, how do I stay open? How do I bring my fears or my resentments or my pain or my wound into artful practice? That's the question I get, in a relational moment where it could go south really fast, right? Or it could, like, bring us both closer to the divine really fast. And how do I address that moment? I'd love to hear what you think works.
Well, don't suppress it. I think that's what often happens when people are trying to get to the third stage. They'll feel something that doesn't feel third stage, and then they'll suppress it and do some performative thing, right? So even if you graze over it for a moment, take that deep breath, and you're like, I'm feeling really clenched right now. I want to love you, but I'm noticing all this stuff coming up, right? That would be a second stage way to communicate. And sometimes just receiving the validation or the I see you from your partner can just be like, relax you enough. Or like, okay, I don't need that anymore. Now I can just relax and love you. Yeah.
I just love the way you put that. I'm feeling very clenched right now and I want to love you. I mean, it's such a simple thing to say. Yeah. Such a simple thing to say. And yet so many moments that, kind of explode into, the power struggle. Miss that.
Yeah.
Right? So
isn't that the foundation of everything? We all just want to love and be loved. So if we can just remember that.
Yeah. So that would be something I just want to bookmark for the people, at home, that's a scale. Being able to identify, my body's clenching, my heart's clenching, my butt's clenching, you know what I mean? Whatever's clenching. But I want to be more open in love with you. And I'm not quite sure how to get there.
Yeah. So simple.
Yeah.
It's so simple and so overlooked.
Yeah, right.
And not easy, because when all of that is occurring, it's sometimes hard to name.
Yeah.
Right? It's just hard to name, and we go into this state and we get confused.
Yeah.
So really taking that gentleness and slow approach with yourself to really meet what is arising is essential.
Yeah. Yeah, and without giving the first stage short shrift here, if we could just back up a little bit, it would be great to discern and because there are let's call it light and dark first stage moments, right? Where we're super selfish, or we're super rageful, or we're super whatever, in pattern so much. But then there's these healthy first stage moments that you talked about, where you're identifying your needs, and I wonder if you could speak a little more about how you see people, just navigating that first stage of really identifying. I don't know, I'm kind of nerding out here a little bit, but it feels like both first and second stage, where you're identifying your wounds. Like most people, including myself in this, like it took me a long time to just really get like, oh, this is what happens to my nervous system when a woman gets angry and withdraws. Okay, where did that come from, right?
Yeah.
Where did that come from? And so how do you suggest people like really get masterful in understanding what their needs are, or what their wounds are, and where they need to work, so that when they go to make art, it's coming out in the proper way?
Well, simply becoming aware of your wounds moves you from the first stage to the second stage.
Okay, that's good to know.
In my perspective. So when you're in the first stage, you're not aware of your wound. You're living the wound. You're in the wound. You are the wound. But as soon as there's that little voice inside of you, and we all have it, it pops in, maybe even for a flash second, like, why do I feel this way? Or what's going on? That's your second stage voice, like urging you to grow through that experience, to relax through that experience. But the patterns are so strong, some of them. They're so intense that voice could only peek in for just a minute before we
and you're like, shut the fuck up. I don't want to hear from I don't want to hear from you. Yeah.
Sometimes it's so hard. Myself, still all the time, I'll be in a pattern that I don't like, but a part of me does like it. A part of me does like, and I don't want to take that deeper breath. I like being there, right?
I want to be self-righteous.
Yeah, so we're playing with this tension where a part of us really likes to be in the pattern, in the wound. There's a comfort there. There's a security there. And then there's a part of us that obviously doesn't want to be there because it's not supporting or serving the lives and relationships that we want to live. So we have to be motivated by that. Like, is this living in this pattern, living in this wound, producing the results that I want?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. I've really been trying to play with this myself, which is to just name the pattern without it being a problem.
Yeah.
Right? Like, ooh, I am so in my pattern right now. And okay.
Cool. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah,
It doesn't have to change necessarily.
Yeah.
And the beautiful thing that I love, and I teach this a lot, is that moving into the third stage doesn't mean the first stage pattern is going to disappear. It might still be there. You're just not entrenched in it anymore. You're not trapped by it anymore. You can give love and feel nervous as fuck. You can give love and also feel some of those things still there, but you just start to free yourself from them so they're not running the show anymore.
Yeah, our mutual friend Eli Buren gives this example of these big, beautiful trees that have huge knots in them, right? And that those knots are part of the beauty of the tree, and so whatever our, first stage wounds or patterns are, they might always be a knot that we just have to kind of grow around.
I like that.
Yeah. And I also really love the image of, are you familiar with kintsugi? The Japanese, basically the idea is that something that breaks, it's an art to put it back together, right? In a really beautiful way that is often more beautiful than the original because of its flaws. And I think that that's a nice way that I like to look at, bringing our first stageness, our young one, our reactive one, our collapsed one, first into awareness, which I guess, like you're saying, brings it into the second stage. And then some form of expression or revealing, or how would you define like that moment where it goes, okay, I'm aware of this wound that I'm in, but now I want to make art with it. How does someone practice that?
I'd say first, don't rush the process, because sometimes you can't.
Yeah.
Sometimes I wouldn't encourage you to practice through a wound if the wound still has quite a big grip on you and needs some love and attention and more therapeutic care in that second stage domain.
Yeah.
But if the wound is something that you just know, I've worked on this, I've done a lot of work on this, and it's just not going away. I feel it. It's here all the time. Okay, now how do I work with it? How do I live the life I want to live? How do I, expand my full expression with this still here, right? And then it's just a practice of doing the damn thing. Like, just like if you have a pattern playing an instrument and your hand just doesn't move a certain way, at some point you're just going to have to learn how to play really, really good with that weird hand, right? So that is the practice, as you know.
Yeah. I like to think about, I don't know, I have my pinky's a little messed up and I play guitar. So right when I try to hammer with my pinky, it's always one of those things where I have to really press hard to get it to hammer down.
There's a guitar player, Django Reinhardt, who had 3 fingers, I think.
Oh, shit.
Yeah.
Perfect example. Perfect example. Perfect example. And I think, I think it's really good for people to just understand that they can have 3 fingers and still be wonderful artists, right? They could have deep childhood wounding that they may never fully heal from and still be beautiful artists,
And 3 fingers is different than a broken finger.
True that.
Because you don't want to play with a broken finger. And that's what I was saying before. You need to heal it before you can play. But 3 fingers, it's like, okay, well, this is what I got. These are the limits that I'm given. I could complain about it and fester in it or keep trying to seek healing, or I can just live with this. And we all have limits. We all have patterns, some more severe than others. So there's no limitation that's too great for you to love through. You could be totally paralyzed and find a way to give all your love through just your eyes or just your breath. And so we work with what we've got. And we aren't too hard on ourselves for the limits that we have, but we still do the work to, stretch through them, but we're not hating them or
I think that's a really and trying to remove this, pernicious tendency to fix it. Right? And so many people get into personal development work or even my work or your work because they want to fix something. They want to become more masculine. They want to become more feminine. Like it's something that they need to fix. And it isn't. It's just something it's just an opportunity for more wholeness, So we've laid a foundation for on what the 3 stages are, at least given by David Data. You can find these in many of David's books, or you can just ask ChatGPT to, pretty much outline David's 3 stages. And these are just our experiences and interpretations of it. We don't speak for David in any way. So I just want to identify one more term that people use a lot in our space, which is sexual polarity. And when we're talking about sexual polarity, we're really talking about practice that lives in, this is that sort of living in the 3rd stage place, right? Although the scales for learning sexual polarity, according to the framework you just laid out, would live in the 2nd stage. That's the learning to belly breathe, for example, or learning to eye gaze, or learning to, let's say, match breath, or, like the basic scales that people can, learn in your workshops and my workshops, and then which would allow the art of love to come through. So how would you define sexual polarity, just for any of the people who haven't heard that term before?
Well, sexual polarity exists in all the stages as well. And that's one of the biggest conflations that I see when someone throws out the word polarity is no one really knows what kind of polarity you're talking about.
And the whole universe is polarity.
There's unhealthy forms of polarity, which would fall into the 1st stage domain. And then, of course, what we strive to teach is the healthy, sacred forms of it. But in short, it's an arc of attraction between 2 things, right? It's the shortest way to say it. The simplest analogy is a magnet, positive, negative poles. There's a pull, there's a magnetism to those. And when you put same ends together, they repel.
Yeah.
And so we can have that kind of attraction or repulsion in two bodies as human beings. And we can strive to generate that consciously, or most of the time what happens is it happens unconsciously. Right.
Right. Mm-hmm. And when we're talking about polarities, we're not simply talking about masculine and feminine, right? Mm-hmm. Emptiness and fullness.
Exactly.
Light and dark. Mm-hmm. And so this arc of energy that happens when we sort of turn up the opposite poles of our magnets is what creates the magnetism, let's call it, of attraction. Mm-hmm. But I'm often letting people know that you don't have to think about this in terms of masculine, feminine. You just look in the natural world and you'll see North Pole, South Pole, you'll see space and, form, right? Mm-hmm. Emptiness and form. So you touched on something that I'd like to double click on, which is there's a lot of conflations and misinterpretations of not only David Deda's work, but your work, my work, the entire sort of polarity space. Mm-hmm. I saw a post the other day that said something about polarity puts women in boxes or something like that. Mm-hmm. And I thought to myself, I'm not sure where they're getting that, because any definition of the feminine that I've ever heard from people who really know what they're talking about is that the feminine is everything happening all the time, all at once, in every direction. It's like all existence is the feminine. So I don't really think there's a box big enough for that. So, but that just, proves to me that people are kind of pulling threads or, little clips and sort of running with them, I guess, based on their own wounding. But I'm curious, what are the biggest sort of misinterpretations or conflations or just downright mistakes people are making when they talk about your work?
Yeah, it's a huge topic. Mm-hmm. Attraction is such an interesting, compelling topic for so many people, right? And the terms masculine and feminine can have a lot of different meanings. And on the cultural level, we usually interpret it as masculinity and femininity. And on the first stage level, what a lot of people teaching polarity are speaking to is that first stage domain of how can I be more shiny on the outside and move a certain way and do this kind of thing to attract this kind of attention, just superficial attention, or a man who provides or who's strong and who, makes a lot of money and is successful. Those are first stage domains of polarity. They're not unimportant. Like, we might have desires in the first stage. Pretty much any woman I'll ask is, do you want a man who can provide? They'll say yes, and that's not a bad thing. Yeah. But it's important not to stop there, right? We grow through it. For a woman who has a deep spiritual heart, she wants more than a man who can provide, obviously. Yeah. So that's a really good way to take someone through this journey, right? Like, a woman who is deep, she would love a man who can provide, and she wants a man who is also deep, right? Who is free in himself, who can hold her beyond the physical domain, right? Yeah. And so that's a really important domain to address, because that is the third stage domain of polarity, right? Yeah.
What I see a lot of people misunderstand is that polarity work is about just the physical bodies, like you're talking about, but that there's a spiritual aspect to it. David used to talk about it as consciousness and love, right? And this sort of the magnetism of consciousness and love. Mm-hmm. And so when people are, talking about polarity work, I'm often struck by the shallowness of their interpretation is to just stop at the masculine and feminine, which most people conflate to mean man and woman. Mm-hmm. Right? But you and I have both seen men in a highly, pleasure-filled, juicy movement space, fully embodying the feminine, right? Or the feminine energies, and a woman resting as consciousness, and the same polarity happening.
Absolutely.
And I just think we can't say this enough, because so many people tend to misunderstand that we're talking, when we say masculine and feminine, we're really talking man and woman. Now, most of the world is heteronormative, right? Few percent or not, but it doesn't really matter. Even in heteronormative relationships, right? Being able to flip around and, play with that, I think is really important. One of the criticisms, I guess, of sexual polarity work is that it infantilizes women. And again, I was always really surprised by that because the way that I've learned about it was that she is everything. And so I'm just curious how you address that criticism.
Well, a man might have an erotic delight, let's say, in some maiden-like energies. And what happens when a man has that is that women will try to be like that more to please him. And there could be a lot of sexual joy in playing like the little cheerleader girl and being kind of like, oh my God, I don't know what I'm doing, what I'm saying, right? There could be sexual play in that, but that's not all a deep man wants from you. And even if a man is asking for that from you, it's important for you as a woman to know your depth. And often when women get caught in this, like, he's infantilizing me, it's usually an indication of their own pattern playing out. Like they feel infantilized. They feel like they can't step in their full power with a man. They feel like they have to perform or be this certain way in order to please him, right? So often it's an indication of their pattern as equally as the man's for wanting to hold on to this maidenhood quality forever, right? So we have a responsibility as women to step in our own power with a man regardless of what he's asking from us. Maybe he wants your maiden-like energy, but remember your own depth as a woman and learn to anchor in that and give that without any shoulds or without any obligation. Right?
Yeah. I mean, there are highly energizing role plays. I mean, I cannot tell you how many women love daddy. Dark daddy energy, right? And how many men love, dirty little girl energy. I mean, we have these sort of archetypes that naturally sort of enliven us, but none of it really matters if we're not deeply heart connected, right? And that is the moment. So even if we're playing dark daddy, dirty little girl energy, right? I mean, if there's not a deep, a literal, I consider it like a literal feeling of the heart, like a literal feeling, the weight of my heart, right? If I disconnect from that, I tend to get into, I'm just pleasure seeking. I'm just pleasure seeking, and I'm not actually in the exchange of this sort of really deep, loving play. Is that how you see it?
Yeah. And for women, it's often pleasing, right? Maybe there's pleasure seeking in there, but we have a tendency to get into a trap of needing to please, right? And that is a huge shadow for women that prevents us from growing from first stage polarity into third stage polarity. Because in essence, it should be freeing. Right. You should feel free.
Right.
If you don't feel free, you need to take a step back and do some of that second stage work. When you're practicing in the third stage, you can play in the full spectrum of colors and energies. And there's no shoulds, there's no have tos, there's no, like performance or need to fit into a box. You're simply just making art and playing, and you're playing it in a way that maintains that polarity, like you're connected to that field, so that will look like you playing on a certain end of the spectrum, but you're not trapped in that.
Right. A couple things you said I'd love to just expand on. Power. For example, like how do you see, because I think we're at this remarkable stage where for so many years, men have been empowered for the most part, right? There's certain cultures where that wasn't totally true, but men have been empowered physically and financially. And now we're getting to this place in the last 50 years where women are finding their power in all kinds of domains. And so I'm curious how you might see some of those shadows playing out.
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, I'll take this back to the personal journey of moving through the three stages in regards to feminine expression and power, right? Because in the first stage, we are often living disconnected from our power, right? That's where our victimhood and the infantilization and the need to please daddy and all of those wounds patterns play out, right? And when a woman grows from the first to the second stage, she reclaims her power. She's like, I'm a whole ass sovereign woman. I could say what I want when I want. I could wear whatever I want. I don't need to please anybody. Yeah. And that's a really significant and important stage for women to grow through.
Yeah.
What I see happening is that women believe that that is the end-all, be-all of feminine empowerment. That me liberating my expression and saying whatever the fuck I want when I want and wearing whatever I want when I want is the ultimate empowerment for women. And I like to invite women into another layer, that it doesn't end there. Not everyone's ready to go into that next layer.
Right.
And so I could suggest to, a lot of the women I work with are like, I freed my expression. I feel whole and sovereign. I know how to ask for my needs. I need more, right? I mentioned that in the beginning. It's like, okay, well, how can we bring more artistry through your expression? And artistry, there is an element of restraint, of pulling the energies in and deepening them and grounding them. So it's more exacting. So it's not just saying whatever the fuck you want when you want. It's saying it in a way that has the exact impact that your deepest devotion and heart is desiring. So that requires you to draw in all that energy and really direct it and harness it. And that's, everyone's not ready for that stage, because sometimes I could suggest that to a woman and she'll be like, well, it feels too, you're trying to control me. And for her, at that time in her life, that may be true.
Yeah.
And the process shouldn't be forced.
Yeah. Oh, that's a great point, right? In the second stage, sort of learning to be fully expressed and learning to be fully sovereign and to say whatever you want and to speak your needs and to stand your ground and, whatever you need to do, that there is a steeping in that that doesn't necessarily lend itself to making art yet.
Right.
Yeah, and that's a really great point for people to get, and I think men, also need to sort of live in that reality as well, like, because we want to move to it, and yet I know, and I've heard you teach this, right, that there's so many simple ways to like gently move into a third stage moment. For example, softening your throat. Softening, no matter what's happening. No matter what's happening, you can soften your throat, right? No matter what's happening, you soften your heart. You soften your cervix if you're a woman, right?
Yeah.
And so,
so that, because that's a practice, but it's so that you could feel the field more, feel your partner's heart more, and give the thing that's actually required, what love requires, right? So that's the biggest movement that I see, is that women in the second stage who are really attached to saying things how they want when they want it, right? Like, well, I don't have to do things more feminine. I should be able to say it exactly how I want, and he should be able to respond this way.
Right.
And I'm like, well, is he responding the way you want with that free, whatever you feel expression? And if not, can you let go of your own attachment to saying what you want to say, how you want to say it, and feel into his heart and what the moment is actually requiring? So you're putting yourself aside and you're delivering beyond the self. You're expressing beyond the self. And that is what defines third stage polarity. You're not doing it for yourself. You're not even doing it for him. On some level you are, and that might be the second stage. Like, I'm offering this to nourish you, and I'm offering this to heal you. But at some point it just becomes, I'm offering this because this is what needs to come through, and this is what's going to generate a deeper field of love between us in the moment.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so if a woman has a pattern of being really sharp and intense, and that's not creating the love that she wants, she might have to put her ego aside and learn how to soften her voice so that it lands in the heart of her partner.
Yeah.
Right? And to some women, like I said, that might feel confining. That might feel like, stop telling me what to do.
Right.
Right?
Which feels more like a first stage moment.
It's a first stage reaction.
Yeah, reaction. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. Don't tell me what to do. I'm just going to express myself the way, and men do this too, right? I'm just going to express, I'm just getting this off my chest because you need to hear my truth. Doesn't matter if my truth totally, collapses you or whether it creates love. And I like to think about expression in that way. It's like, okay, I'm expressing for me. Going to Burning Man, I'm wearing my, tasseled unicorn outfit because that's who I am, and or I'm expressing in a way that deepens us and heals us, and and is for both of us, or I'm expressing because that's what love wants.
Yeah.
Which may not be what I want or what you want. It may be something totally different.
And it's hard to really put that into words. But I thought of something as you were talking to go back to the infantilization of women.
Yeah.
And the nature of feminine practice. So there's this belief I see sometimes that to be in the feminine is to just be emotional, to like express your emotion when it's coming up. Like if I'm sad, I'm just going to cry. And if I'm happy, I'm just going to wail and laughter. And right. And on some level, that is feminine expression, but it's more first stage feminine expression in the sense that a child does that.
Yeah.
A child laughs when they're happy. A child cries when they're sad.
Right.
They're totally free in their expression, right?
Yeah.
So there's nothing wrong with that, but the feminine practice doesn't stop there. But sometimes if we're just expressing in that way, usually a child expresses in that way because they unconsciously need something, right? They're not aware. Like they have an emotion. They're crying because they need something that they don't know what they need. That's the first stage.
Yeah.
Sometimes women are like, I'm expressing, love me, but they don't know what they need. They haven't even identified it in themselves. And that's an infantile approach to our own practice. Like we need to know what we're crying for. What am I actually seeking? There's a beauty in just liberating our cry. But when it comes to relational intimacy, it's like there's a bigger question to ask, I guess, in the self of just like, what am I needing right now? What do I need in this cry? What do I need in this offering? Am I needing his, am I just feeling desperate for his attention and just to feel loved? Or do I really want to feel met? Do I really want him to come into my heart? And just identifying that shift in yourself and feeling into your deepest needs as a woman as you're crying. It's like, I want you to love me as deeply as possible. Like, come into this expression, meet my heart, meet me as I am. I don't need you to. That's the biggest difference, too, of the first and third stage. When we move through that second stage period, we do come into a place of wholeness in the self. Like I'm offering,
meaning we can meet our own needs.
We can meet our own needs. There's not that desperation to get your love and affection because I'm going to be lost without you. We've grown past that. And the first stage, infantile feminine expression is like crying because you need that love because without it, you're just lost, right? So you need to come into a place in yourself where you feel like, I'm okay. Like I got myself and I'm offering you my heart because at the end of the day, I want you to love me. I want to feel communion with you. So I'm offering these tears with that longing really exposed, that deeper longing really exposed. And coming into that awareness in yourself as a woman is going to shift your expression and the way your man feels you from an infantile wailing crybaby to a deep third stage goddess that he just wants to pour his deep love into. That's
such an important point. I mean, that touches what I talk about a lot about evoking, right? Same thing. You're crying because you're upset about something. And it can either be, I'm crying because you're touching the same wound that I've had my entire life. And I'm angry at you, just like I was angry at my dad. That's the cry. That's going to evoke a certain response from your partner.
Exactly.
Usually one that's deflective and defensive. Or there's the same cry from a place of like, this is my need, right? And then there's this I guess the way I would define it, and then there's that cry from the deep longing of your heart to be met in that. And, I think people oftentimes really need to hear examples of the human experience through the three stages. I think that's one of the magic parts of the three stages is that any moment you could kind of parse out the first, second, and third stage way to address that moment.
Yeah. In any moment, you can tune into each of those stages within yourself.
Yeah. For sure. Okay, so I feel like we've laid a little groundwork with talking about the third stages and sexual polarity and devotion, what all those things mean. We have some questions. I put some questions out to my community, and men came back with quite a few questions, but we whittled it down. I think I'm going to condense one of these questions into something that I sort of am curious about as well, which is, how do you like to be led? right? And then you could expand that and like, how do you see other women that you work with really responding to leadership? It's something that's in my work about, what is good masculine leadership, and hearing from a woman's perspective, what actually feels good and what doesn't, and what are some of the, cheat codes, right? that men can, consider.
I'd say the biggest leader in a relationship isn't so much what the man is doing, but the quality and depth of his attention, of his presence. That leads the relationship on its own. He doesn't have to force leadership or move my body from here to here necessarily. But just by the mere fact of him already knowing where we're going, what the next thing is, already holding the bigger picture in his awareness, in his heart, that itself is leadership. That is something for me to relax into. On the outside, it probably doesn't look like much. It might look like nothing, right?
Right.
So I think when people have a thought of masculine leadership, it's the man coming in and being like, okay, we're going to go here and we're going to do this and now sit down there and do this. And there is an eroticism in that. And that is a form of masculine leadership. That's not necessarily what I am interested in as a woman. That's all nice, but just that isn't enough for me.
Yeah, because it could be strategic.
Exactly.
It's not necessarily a deep knowing, which is what I think I hear you saying.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Not all women are attuned to that, though.
Yeah.
For some women, that leadership in the very practical sense is ecstatic and probably enough. For some women, they might feel, wow, he leads so well in all these domains. He knows how to step in. He knows how to plan. He knows how to be on time. He knows how to, take us from one moment to the next. But I don't feel held by his awareness.
Yeah.
Right. And
that's such a great point. I just want to say this to the men, right? You can actually, be really meticulous in planning an evening or an experience. But throughout that evening and experience, if your breath is shallow or your attention is spotty or you're not actually holding her from one moment to the other, it's not all your great planning is going to mean shit.
Yeah.
That's kind of what you're talking about.
Strategy is the killer of a woman's eros.
That's so good.
A certain kind of woman's eros.
You need to make a bumper sticker of that. I love that.
We don't want to feel you plotting and planning and trying to get a reaction out of us. And we want to feel a man attuned to our relaxation. And usually in a deep, intimate relationship, especially a long-term one in which you might be practicing polarity, if you are in the feminine pole, your body is the measure of happiness and love in the relationship. And a deep man who's leading the relationship is using your body as a measure of success, but he's not plotting like, how do I do this? Or how do I do that? Or I need her to do this. He's just like, oh, when I shifted this, she took a deep breath. Okay, that's nice. Let me do this again. Oh, she clenched up. Okay, let me move this way again. Oh, she relaxed. That's great. But there's not an attachment to the relaxation of a woman, specifically the attachment for her to relax so that you feel good.
Yeah, I see that. That's a big thing that men trip over a lot. Is they, they learn a few skills, right? How to track her breath or how to, feel her body somewhat, but then they get attached or even like addicted to it. That if she's not relaxing, then they get very tense, which then will make her more tense.
Right.
So it's this really beautiful, paradox between being attuned without attachment.
Yeah, and that's the third stage. That's living in the third stage. There's just like if you're jamming with someone, playing music with someone, it's like you're in a vibe, you're in the rhythm, you're hitting those right notes, and all of a sudden you're out of it. But it's like, oh, that just happened. Let's get back in.
Yeah.
There's not like
it's not a value, it's not a measure of your worth.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And when we're in...
Please listen, men, to that. It's not... Yeah.
And it's so important to track that when we are in that mode, when a man is in that mode of trying to get a woman's response so that he feels good, that is a first stage moment, even if on the outside he's leading and he's breathing and he's doing all the right things visually, right? If in his system there's that little tinge of, I need her to show up this way so that I feel loved, so that I feel good, that in itself is going to actually prevent that deeper level of surrender that you probably want on that deep level.
Yeah. And that, I think that's such a crucial piece. I mean, I see with women too, I'm going to give him my devotion, but there's an attachment, or my energy.
Oh my God.
There's an attachment to a certain response, right? And that attachment, pretty much just cancels out the, any good intention your practice was bringing.
It's so true.
Yeah.
And it's the nature of spiritual practice in a sense. It's like
one of the first noble truths.
How can I live as devotion and let that be enough? Like my practice is to live as devotion, to live as love. And sometimes that might land with my partner and he'll receive it and it'll be delicious and ecstatic. And oftentimes it won't. Will I collapse? Will I blame him? Will I make him the enemy? Or will I just say, oh, he can't receive it? Doesn't change anything for me.
Right.
I'm still here. I'm still love. I'm still
good.
I'm still good. So for a man, that slightly different texture would be, oh, I'm giving her my presence and she's still resistant and not receiving it.
Yeah.
I'm still awareness. I'm still present. I am.
I'd like to expand on that a little bit because that's a question I get from a lot of men, which is like, what do I do when I legitimately feel like I'm giving her my gift, right? Or I'm giving her my presence, or I'm really trying to lead us in through, either some issues we're having or something in the family or so, and she's just not accepting it. And how would you suggest that men, work with that? Because there's often this sense of like, I'm really trying. I really feel like I'm tuned into some wisdom or some deep knowing, and I'm doing my best to present a way to do it, and she's still resisting it.
Yeah.
What's a great way for a man to address that?
Sure. Well, like I just mentioned, there's your solo practice, which is stay anchored in your own presence and depth of awareness despite whatever she's doing, despite her reaction. That's your primary practice for yourself, that's the practice. And then moving through the stages again, this is why we talk about them, because they're so important and so relevant to every question, is to let her know, right? Is to communicate. Like, I'm giving you my presence and I notice that you are resisting me, that you're pushing back. Why? Like, what's going on? What can I do so that you feel safer with me? Is it something, the way I'm breathing, or right? Like you ask her what she needs, and that's usually a good portal for really working on things. And that's infinite in a relationship. Like it's going to come up again and again. She probably has a pattern of resistance that's going to be perpetually there that you're going to have to work with. But if she's willing to acknowledge it, and to say, oh, I'm resisting you again, I'm sorry. And just that moment of opening to you it will be worth it, right?
Or I'm still mad about this time last week when, you didn't lead when I need you to lead, or whatever, or you were too overbearing or whatever.
Yeah. So having that conversation is important so you can get to that, build that foundation together. And if you do that and she's still super resistant all the time, then it's really a question of, is my presence, would it be better received somewhere else?
Yeah.
Right? If she can't receive the deepest gift you have to offer and is constantly resisting it, rejecting it, and isn't even open to working with it, that will feel hurtful over the long term. And that's really a question of, why are you trying?
Exactly. Well, since you brought this up, I would really love your take on this. You're in a long-term relationship. And so, what do you see as being the foundational, pillars of success for, moving past that period of, the first couple of years of hormone-driven, novelty-driven excitement, and into something where two people, literally are growing together and expanding their practices and healing and, whatever you want to call it. What do you see really works in that?
Yeah. I think in all relationship, there's going to be a several year-long process of just figuring out how to be together.
Oh, yeah.
Some people, it happens easier than others, but you're throwing two people together with all their patterns and wounds and histories and
moving in together into often tight.
And it's going to bring up a lot. And to stick through that process is hard. But if you're both committed to love, I believe there is a journey to the other side where then you can just love each other. Like it's really so simple, the practice of just showing up and giving love to your partner and making space to love them the way they desire most deeply to be loved and vice versa. And knowing what lights your partner up, knowing what fulfills their deepest soul, and making time each day to give that to your partner, letting your life that you're sharing with your partner be centered around that kind of generosity where you're both fulfilling each other's deepest spiritual, erotic desires. And it's nothing huge. It's not fantasy. It's not role play. It's honestly just the quality of your energy and the quality of your presence when you're together. And prioritizing that.
Yeah, that seems to be the really important piece, right? And so what you've seen is that as people sort of make it through that really crunchy, 1, 2, 3 year period of learning how to actually be humans together, right? Like most of the time it ends up being living together. But that process in and of itself requires, extraordinary generosity, I think I heard you say, and a real devotion to love itself, and to giving love and being love. And I would imagine to your own personal practice so that you stay grounded and, embodied in your energy, in your essence, right? Okay. Because I see so many people hit that period and not know what to do to get through it, right? Not know how to live. And I imagine you coach a lot of people that are like sort of entering that period or stuck in that period and trying to get out of it. And I think that's a really crucial place because we don't need each other anymore.
Right. And it's always easy to remember that. I'm like, well, I'm just going to go off on my own and I don't need this person. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. But it's so beautiful to stick through it. And any problem you have in the relationship you're in, if it's very likely is going to carry off to the next one. So it's probably like 90% of the time.
Yeah, that's been my experience.
So in that difficult period, I often, am working with women who are like, I just want to leave. Right? I'll see them want to leave too soon. Obviously, there's a time and a place to leave, but I really often see people trying to leave too soon because he doesn't give me what I want and I can't be myself around him and da-da-da-da-da. If you can't be yourself with this person, what makes you think you can be yourself with the next person? How can you be yourself no matter what is there, right? That's your practice.
Yeah.
Of course, other people can evoke more of your natural whatever, but that inability to be yourself in any circumstance is a you problem.
Right. I think that's the thing that so many people I think get stuck on is they're really convinced that the next person is going to be so much. And look, and there are people that are more aligned or better matches.
Absolutely.
That's not totally untrue, but the same issues are going to come up.
Usually.
Most of the time. And so, you don't expect that I'm not going to have these feelings with the next person.
Or it's going to be easier with the next person. That's the big one. This is so hard. It's going to get easier. It rarely gets easier. Relationship is hard. That discomfort you're feeling in your relationship is a portal for you to really face and for you to communicate through and express yourself through. And if you're following that pulse within of like, how can I love this person as deeply as possible and as openly as possible? And you're trusting that you are doing all you can and it's still not working. Yeah, that's a good time to leave. But often we hold ourselves back. We're not giving our fullest. And we think that if we have a new person, it's going to get easier, and it's not.
Yeah. That's often what I try to tell people is that, most of us stay in relationship. Like you said, they leave too early, and I would agree. But most people are confused about should I stay or should I go? Normally that's a sign that you have not given your deepest practice.
Right.
It's not that they haven't done it. It's that you feel like, oh, I there's something that I haven't really been generous around or opened into or practiced with, or, and so I really can't let myself leave until I do that.
Yeah. And it often requires you to face a really big fear. A fear of being seen in a certain way, of exposure, of expressing yourself. There's often that limitation with our own fears that prevents us from doing it.
Yeah. I like to think about that as going into the underworld together, right? Like at some point in a relationship, Jordan Peterson talks about this, how you're going to go into the depths of hell with your partner and, and I've just seen that to be true more often than not. And I'm curious, does that feel like your experience as well? Like that there's this sense of like, learning how to go into the underworld together, or how to how to be with each other's deepest wounds together. That's the way I would define it, right? Like really see the gnarliest, gremlinisty, gargoyle-y parts of each other.
Yeah.
While, and make art from that.
Yeah.
We want to take it back.
Don't run away. Yeah. Don't go to the other side of the fence. Don't long for something else. Just be with the ugliness that's there. Open to it. Breathe with it. And that is really all we can do.
It's so freeing, though. I'm sure you've had this experience, like, to let yourself as a practitioner, let's say, go there, like snot flying, ugly as can be, the worst childhood wound I've got. I'm letting you see it without projecting it onto you, and you're loving it.
Yeah. So healing.
It is so amazing. It's so healing. And I think that so many people give up before that miracle.
Yeah.
Because the wound has something to do with how they behaved, and so they personalize it, whatever happens. But I think that that's something that I want to keep, letting people know is possible, because it is. It is possible to be those kinds of sources of healing for each other. Because we talk about this in the, in the polarity space. There isn't really a talk about, and I've never really heard David talk about this, about the healing portion of it. But it is so healing to be practitioners together through deep patterns and stored trauma. And it's a very healing experience. It's not just about, fucking each other to God. There's something deep that gets shifted.
Well, that's the beauty of commitment and that sense of I'm in, because it gives you that opportunity to go through that process without fearing that person's going to leave.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And that is a really beautiful process. And you can experience that in friendships too. Like friends that like, I love you and I got your back, and your ugly comes out, your bitch comes out, like the worst parts of you come out. Maybe you fight and tussle, maybe you don't talk for a few weeks, but you come back and you're like, I'm here. And that deepens your relationship. It deepens your intimacy. And it is it's just beautiful. Yeah. It really
sort
is.
Of the height of being human together.
And it comes through commitment and not running away from the hard stuff and that sense of I'm really here with you. Of course, there's a limit if someone's being abusive or whatever, but that's usually not the kind of relationships that I'm working with. People come in and they're just dealing with stuff that everyone deals with. It's hard.
Yeah. No, it's hard being human. Thank you, Mom. Thank you, Dad. Yeah.
World.
Yeah. Okay. Another question from the masculine gallery here. What do women wish men understood better about their emotional needs? And I'll speak to this from the masculine. Men will often have this experience of she's in a storm, she's in a hot mess, and I want to be able to help. I want to be able to support. I want to be able to, be with her and understand what are the needs at the base of whatever emotional storm is happening. But anything I try just seems to, piss her off more or get me kicked out of the room or whatever. And so I think men really would like to know, how do we help you, either not necessarily find your needs, but just support you in that exploration and expression.
Yeah. Well, like I've already said, stop trying, get rid of the strategy,
okay.
And just stop trying to fix anything, right? How can you be with our emotional experience as you would be with the weather or nature, right? And just be with it. Just hold it with your awareness and your presence. And that is honestly all we want. We don't want you to process with us, even though we might try to get you to.
Yeah.
Women do this thing where we'll try to get our man to like process and talk with us and do all this stuff, but then we don't like it at the end, or like it depolarizes.
Yeah.
So don't get hooked into whatever she's trying to lure from you.
I'm so guilty of that.
Yeah.
I'm so guilty.
We like to lure. I like to lure. I'm like, I want this kind of attention, but it's not the kind of attention I actually want. I think I want his attention through him talking to me or telling me this or telling me that, but I just want to feel his whole body and his whole breath and his whole being just holding all of it without trying, not with like, okay, I'm holding you. Okay, here we go. It's just like, I'm here.
Yeah.
I'm here. Breathing deep, unagitated by it, and just relaxing. Your relaxation in a woman's emotional storm is the greatest gift you can offer.
Yeah, no, that's a gem. Yeah. Like to really, and it's so hard. I mean, just, from a man's perspective, right? It's, when your partner's pissed and having a really deep experience, especially if it has something to do with you, which 80% of the time it likely does, that's really, potent practice for men.
Yeah.
I've always found that I can do that when I know it's coming. Right. So if you just give me a heads up, like I've got some shit coming your way, take a minute to get yourself, I'm good. It's and I think this is probably true for a lot of men, but when it comes out of left field and I don't have a moment to
that's life, baby.
I know, right? fuck. And so, but I think that's something that men struggle with a lot is how to be in relaxation, how to find it in the midst of that.
And we're talking about two-bodied polarity practice. The same thing applies to our own practice, to our own presencing of life's emotional chaos, to life's storms, to life's ups and downs, to life's travesties. Like, how can we just hold it all with our awareness and be with it, right? That's kind of the inner process of finding that ground of being within ourselves when all of that is swirling through. And so when I am fully when I'm the swirl, when I'm the life and fully embodying that, that's what I want to feel from my partners, to feel that sense of communion together, to feel like, oh, we're okay. We're here together. Yeah.
We're in this crazy moment together.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
In those moments, because I really like to try to give my men some tidbits when I'm talking to somebody like you, is in that moment where, let's say you're in the swirl and he isn't quite grounded yet, can't quite find relaxation, feels himself sort of in a collapse, right? Is that a moment, does it work the same way where if he said, hey, I really want to be with you, I'm just going to give me, 30 seconds to catch my breath and I can be with you the way I think you need. Is that
would
work?
feel relaxing.
Okay.
Yeah, that would feel more relaxing than him being lost in that.
And efforting to relax.
Exactly. That would feel more agitating, and I just would probably be like, I'm going to go be by myself, right? But if he was like, I really want to be with you, just I need a moment, just that communication would enable more trust.
Yeah, that's good to know. Good to know.
Yeah.
From a woman's perspective, what does it look like to say no to a woman lovingly and respectfully as a powerful man? So I like that. Like, how can men say no? Right? Of course, everything, we talk a lot about how women can say no to men, right? But I don't really hear this a lot where we're talking about how men can artfully say no, hold boundaries, and stay open, relaxed, as you've talked about.
Yeah.
How does that work for you?
I could feel the difference in my body between a no that is rooted in control and like trying to get me to be a certain way, which is going to piss me off.
Yeah.
Versus a no that's coming from his own inner authority and a deep connection with what the moment needs. So one might have all his tension and agitation and attachment in it. Like, no, I can't try to do it, but I could feel it.
No.
Maybe if you're listening to this, you can feel it too, what that no would feel like. It would feel agitating versus like a warrior's no, a grounded, rooted no that is coming from his love for you and his love for that moment, right? It's coming from attunement rather than from control. I think it's the biggest.
And attunement, not only to you, but attunement to the moment, the relationship, love, like this isn't serving us. Right. Like this isn't the right way to go kind of thing. Yeah. I think that's really important. And I think that men, I was talking with a couple other women a couple weeks ago on this podcast, and we were really getting into this, how as a man to set a boundary. And this is sort of an extension of that first question, like what is a nice way to receive a boundary as a woman? Is it really just the same thing? I mean, it seems like we keep coming back to this idea of relaxation and attunement.
Yes.
So practice. I mean, like, this is why we talk about practice over and over and over and over again, because you can't think your way into relaxation and attunement. You literally have to learn
to feel your way,
to do the scales.
Yeah. Women enjoy feeling held in structure and containment. And the first stage version of that would be coming from asserting a personal will over her in the moment, right? I want you to be this way. I want to see you like this. I want this to happen. So I'm making it happen, right? That for some women might feel erotic. For some women who are really connected to their spiritual heart, it's going to feel agitating and like control, right? Listen to that discernment. We can feel the difference. We really can. And sometimes what I see when women are practicing polarity and when people are practicing this, and this is one of those conflations, when a man is trying, but he still has some of that control. She's like, why am I surrendering to this? Like, why do I have to surrender to this? This doesn't feel good. Listen to that. Listen to the fact that it doesn't feel good. Communicate that with him and ask for what you need for it to feel liberating. His containment should feel ecstatic, should feel liberating when it's coming from that really attuned place. And it's really coming from him holding the moment and putting boundaries around it in various different ways.
Yeah, I can say it as a man, when I'm in that space, because I'm in it and then I'm not in it often, right? And to me, it feels the difference feels like I'm attuned to my own center, but I'm also feeling all else, right? And so having a simultaneous awareness on the deepest part of me and the field that we're in at the same time. And again, this is a training, and this is, we're talking a lot about concepts here, but really the work that we do is yogic and meditative, and it's not intellectual.
Right.
And so I hope that people are getting, like, all of the things that we're suggesting here are only really possible with a body mind that can live into them.
Definitely.
This is not the kind of shit that you can just kind of will yourself to do.
Right. And you'll know if you're listening to this and you're like, fuck this is stupid. This probably isn't for you. But if you're like, oh yeah, I could really work on that. Yeah. I am a little too controlling when I offer her boundaries. It is coming from a personal need and from fear, whatever it is. How can I learn how to relax that? Of course, for your own self, so you feel more relaxed and attuned, but also for the sake of your relationship and your woman's trust, because that is what evokes her trust.
Yeah. I would also consider it like a personal form of integrity, right? To be in integrity with your own heart, right? To be in integrity with your own heart, to be in integrity with love itself, right? It feels like just a different place to live from. And I think that that's really at the, foundational core of practice, the heart of practice. So again, as we're talking about these things, it's kind of the experience I had reading reading The Way of the Superior Man, I don't know, 17 years ago, of like having an understanding of like, yeah, this sounds really good. Like, yeah, tussle, you know what I mean? Like, yeah. And yet I had no idea the yoga and the personal work that would have to go into that for me to be able to relax my wound, know it's not about me, and then learn the skills to be playful in a moment when I would be defensive normally.
Yeah.
And so I'm just, bringing that's, if you're listening to this and you're thinking, well, how the fuck do I get there where I'm relaxed and attuned in the midst of her storm? That's normal. Yeah, and it takes years of practice. Yeah.
You're not going to get it the first time.
Yeah.
But just that question alone of checking in with yourself. Am I relaxed? Am I attuned to her heart? Right? That's a very beautiful question to ask yourself ongoingly.
Yeah.
For men and women.
I mean, you can just spend the whole day just going through the day. Am I relaxed? Am I attuned to the moment? Am I attuned to my environment? Yeah. I mean, that would just make the world a better place.
Yeah. And you just keep coming back to it again and again and again. And over years, your presence will deepen if you commit to that. But it's not going to happen overnight. And a lot of people really want that quick solution and that quick fix. But just commit to the process. And that's where devotion comes in. It's like, I'm devotion to depth. I'm devotion to orienting to this depth in myself. The masculine perspective, or this love in myself, which is the more feminine perspective, and just commit to that and don't be hard on yourself when you stray a billion times throughout the day.
Yeah, and I think that's another thing I'd like to remind people is that these are never-ending yogic poses that can always be gestured towards deeper.
Yeah.
Like you don't get someplace.
Yeah.
It's a constant, commitment to failing and getting back up and failing and getting back up. And over the course of many years, there's this concept of 1% improvement a week.
A week? That's pretty good.
That's pretty good, right? I mean, but I think if you practice being just 1% more present every week, that does not seem totally unreasonable.
Yeah.
Or 1% more connected to your heart, or 1% deeper in your breath.
Yeah.
These are things people can do.
And that's the way to track if your relationship is successful or not. Isn't like how happy do I feel or how well are things going my way, but how much more free are we as a couple?
Yeah.
How much more rooted in love and depth are we? Maybe we still fight all the time and have our patterns and it's not easy, but if you two are both growing individually because of your relationship, despite whether it's easy or not, that is a very good sign to stay together.
That's always something I see too, in the people, that are in my programs or friends even, and you can just tell if somebody is good for somebody through them, right? Like I had a good friend who was struggling financially and couldn't quite get his shit together and had 2 kids and And he met this woman and he was very uncertain for months. I don't know, just one, but everything got better for him. His whole life just got better from her presence. And she was so devotional and so accepting and so loving. And of course he was like, oh, this can't be right, and yet everything got so much better. And I think that's a really beautiful way to look at it.
And it might get worse before it gets better, like we talked about.
Fair enough. Yes, fair enough.
Because of the alchemy of coming together. But
fair enough.
I think part of growth is that uncomfortable alchemy process, right? And especially in the beginning, like in the beginning of a spiritual journey, there's usually like a quick jolt, and then it's more smooth sailing, right? And that's kind of how relationship works, and that jolt up could be a lot.
I mean, as I get older and I've been in the space for a while, I just keep finding that this alchemy space is so potent, and finding the ways to try to navigate that, for me at least at this point in my life, is my focus. How to really be in the alchemy of my family karma, my epigenetic wounding, my, all of this stuff, which doesn't go away just because I can practice being certain kind of masculine,
Right.
Yeah. Okay. She's got wounds that I had nothing to do with. And yet I want to be a stand for her healing. What's the best way for me to do that? We've touched on this already, but it's okay. It's good for people to keep hearing, their questions brought back.
Our wounds are always going to come up in relationships. Some people are a little more wounded and have more trauma than others. And as someone who's experiencing someone else's wounds, like if you're in a good place and you're watching your partner's wounds all play out, one of the most important things to track in yourself is the collapse that happens in you with their wounds. So that's the first thing is, can I be with their wound without collapsing? And if you can
or at least with awareness.
With awareness.
Yeah,
right.
yeah. Yeah, I'm collapsing when you get angry.
Yeah.
is a great place to start.
Yeah. And so just holding that presence can be so healing over time. She might not feel it at first, but holding that consistency of, I see your wound, I'm here, I'm not running away, could potentially be enough to gently unwind that over time. At the same time, it's her responsibility to go to therapy.
Yeah.
You are not her therapist.
Yeah. Yeah.
Your presence is not going to heal her on its own. She probably needs to do some work, because something I see a lot is women could be so wounded or have so much mistrust towards men and pain towards men that even if a man is giving his deepest presence, she can't receive it. Right? And that's so painful for him. And if there's a process we need to go through on our own to learn how to receive someone else's attention and presence without putting all that responsibility on our partner all the time.
I just want to bracket that. That feels so important. You said that there's a process that we have to go through to be able to receive their presence and attention. And I think it seems so simple, but I really think a lot of women just miss that. It's not like a natural state for a lot of women in particular to be able to receive, pure presence and love.
I would say it is a natural state.
Fair enough. Okay, fair enough.
It is a natural state. We crave it so deeply, but because of our wounds and because of the culture and our pain with men, it's very hard to. It's hard to trust men again for a lot of women. So we just can't receive what he's giving. And of course, you can create a practice with your partner, maybe 5-10 minutes a day, where you're just practicing opening to his presence. But I wouldn't put the sole responsibility on him. Go see a therapist where you can really practice being seen for an hour and sharing your process and exposing your vulnerabilities and working through the bodily patterns that are clenched, right, from receiving that. And go through that process on your own, and your man will be so grateful when you come and you're like, I worked on this, and he'll feel the change in you of being able to receive him more. Yeah,
no, that's a really beautiful way to put it. And there's so many, remarkable embodiment-based, somatic-based therapeutic modalities now. It's not just all talky talk therapy, right? I mean, you're on the ground, you're rolling around, you're barking, you're like, you're in it, and you're really using your whole body to work with the wound. So there's so many beautiful therapeutic modalities out there now. It's really not so bad.
Yeah.
Thank the Lord. Thank the Lord. So I think we're at the end of time, but I really love the conversation. I'm so glad we could have it. And you'll come back at some point, and we'll dive into more stuff. I mean, it seems like there's an endless list of topics to get into.
Definitely.
Yeah. Is there anything? I'll put all the information on how to find you and how to work with you in the show notes. But is there anything that you want to leave our audience with? Anything in particular you want them to know, or anything you have coming up that you feel would be good for women wanting to jump in?
Yeah. Well, you can visit my website, wayofdevotion.com. I have a women's retreat coming up in April. And I have an ongoing membership space called Love Deeper that you can join anytime.
Oh, cool. So it's just like an ongoing subscription space.
Yeah, and we have a few calls a month. It's a community of women where we practice a lot of this stuff that we're talking about. Yeah, it's really beautiful.
Right on. Practice.
Yes.
Yes. And I also have a community space. It's called the Embodied Relationship Experience platform. And so a lot of practices that I teach are on that. And really what we're talking about here is how to play the scales, which basically is to practice, right? To get on the mat, is what David used to say. And then to take it from the mat into the present moment. That is the big leap, so to speak. But I really am so glad that you came, Nina, and I'm so glad that we got a chance to jam.
Yeah, me too. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, you're so welcome.